the Alabama Crimson Tide, and the first storyline is a big one and an easy one, Blayne, as already Ryan Grubb, what did he last? A couple weeks, right? He's headed to the Seattle Seahawks. I think you mentioned, too, off air, the offensive line coach is now gone. It sounds like promotion could come from within. Of course, Kirby Moore has been a name thrown around from Mizzou. There's been others, but it sounds like this promotion could come from within. But there's already a ton of change going on in Tuscaloosa with Nick Saban hanging it up. Kalen DeBoer gets the job. Then he begins to assemble his staff, and already he's got to make a change at the coordinator spot. It's been a rough last month or so for Alabama fans. Your thoughts on Grubb taking this job? And again, this is a guy that's been with DeBoer seemingly every single step of the way. And them also waiting until the final day of the portal being open late in that day. Interesting move, to say the least, but calculated indeed. I think, to be fair, I think you got to be somewhat calculated in this transfer portal era, and, guys can up and leave. So I think coaches have to be strategic, but all in all, thoughts on what is Alabama going to do in the offensive side of the football? Because again, spring ball is about to start. You've got pieces on the offensive side. I know Bama was gutted by the portal, but they don't have a play caller right now, at least one that's officially named. Thoughts on the latest fallout with this Grubb situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first, Kalen DeBoer is someone who's going to have his system in place. So I don't think it's it's a big deal because Ryan Grubb was calling plays, okay? I mean, he was the play caller at Washington. DeBoer, like I said, heavily involved, but as well as I do, Chris, it's just now to the point where if you're a head coach, unless you're just, up there, and maybe DeBoer is, but if you're up there and proven done it with the play calling level of also being a head coach of like a Lane Kiffin, like a Steve Sarkisian, it's just tough with all the NIL and everything else going on that you have to manage, the roster movement, all that kind of stuff, particularly when there's a big transition like going from Saban to the DeBoer era. So, what they're talking about here, and when we see reports out here, Adam Rittenberg of ESPN saying that Scott Huff is likely the OL coach, likely to leave. So that's even bigger now, okay, because you got Grubb gone, and now Scott Huff is going to follow him to the Seattle Seahawks. So that's two coaches, a coordinator, quarterback coach, and an offensive line coach gone that you're going to now have to replace. They're talking about moving Nick Sheridan, the tight ends coach, to coaching quarterbacks and being the play caller, but he's going to be co-OC with Jamarcus Shepard, wide receivers coach there, according to reports out there from ESPN, and that's not settled, but that's what they're leaning towards doing. I looked into Sheridan a little bit. He was the offensive coordinator at Indiana for a season. Then followed where DeBoer was, and then followed DeBoer to Washington after that. Once DeBoer left, they were kind of a year apart there. So he has called plays before, but doesn't have a ton of experience when it comes to that. Although Rittenberg at ESPN here is saying that Sheridan could be the play caller going forward. I think the biggest thing is now you not only have to deal with, at least with Ryan Grubb, you knew what you were getting if you were Kalen DeBoer. You knew how you worked with him in terms of whether he was a kind of like an author, a ghostwriter of a book, or he was actually the author of the book. You knew what you were getting. Now you've got to work this relationship with Sheridan in that role. And all of it, Chris, is the biggest thing is how does Jalen Milroe fit into this system that is more geared on pocket, throwing the ball down the field, intermediate crossing routes, things of that nature. And, his athleticism is really what Tommy Rees started to take advantage of middle to late in the season. So I'm just fascinated to see how it all works out. But getting an offensive line coach and now getting a tight ends coach, if they do make that move, is going to be paramount, and you got to get that done in a matter of days.
Blayne, I think change is the word of the spring for Alabama. And I don't know if there's a spring game that I'm more intrigued to watch than this one, because it's crazy how in just a month's time, this Alabama football team, this entire program, it looks completely different than it did a month ago. From Nick Saban's retirement, the changes in regards to the roster, the portal gutted this football team. Alabama, Blayne, ranks 115th in college football. Bill Connolly releasing his yearly SP Plus returning production rankings, which, I think a lot of fan bases, they take offense to this because, some will say, well, just because we have X amount of percentage returning, it doesn't mean Y. Well, you're right. It doesn't, but it does help, right? Missouri last year had, 80% of experience returning? We should have seen the breakout season coming probably. If you have a lower amount, it doesn't guarantee a bad year, but there's a lot of change. Alabama, Blayne, 115th in college football with returning production, 44%. 44%. So a lot of change in Tuscaloosa. Starts at the top with Kalen DeBoer, of course. I wonder if Julian Sayin had not left, I wonder if Jalen Milroe's even your starting quarterback. I really do. Do you think there's a legitimate quarterback battle in Tuscaloosa? I mean, again, you lose Julian Sayin, but you have to wonder. I had questions about Jalen Milroe and could they win a national championship with Jalen Milroe, even if nothing changed and Nick Saban was back and everything was status quo. Now with all these moving pieces, I felt good about Ryan Grubb and them tapping into his skill set and getting the most out of him. But I mean, I don't know, Blayne. Because I had my doubts about Jalen Milroe already. I thought those doubts were exposed at times last year. You look at the numbers. I mean, he was impressive. He's a fantastic athlete, but I don't think it's unfair to say there's a real quarterback battle.
Well, I just wonder who that would be. I mean, is Ty Simpson going to be that guy? Dylan Lonergan had some really good things said about him at spring last year, but I think right now, based on here's one thing for Kalen, the only reason I'd push back a little bit on it is because there is no doubt, zero doubt, that Jalen Milroe is the leader of that team in terms of the emotional tie of it, and that DeBoer is already coming in and all that change that you talked about and all that just equity that Saban had built up over decades and been there and change and all this kind of stuff. It might be that you just have to say, hey, we're going to assimilate him to this offense the best we possibly can. We're going to be malleable as coaches, and we're going to adapt our system to fit his strengths and really bring him along in the other areas because everybody believes in him so much. Lank and all that kind of stuff, I mean, it's a real deal. The presence there that he has as a leader and some of the things he was able to do for Alabama. So I don't think we can discount that. But my question is, that it will be a big deal because if he is going to use his legs and things like that, the SEC is a physical league. You're one play away from needing. So who can be that backup guy or the guy that can push him? And it's really going to be a battle between Dylan Lonergan and Ty Simpson. So, I think Eli Holstein, he hit the portal. He's out. So it's really going to be those two, and especially with Julian Sayin gone. So Lonergan's a talented kid. Now, I will tell you this. If he doesn't end up playing at Alabama in the next year or so, and, of course, Austin Mack came over from Washington, who knows? People say that he's really talented. We'll see if he ends up being that guy. He's got familiarity with DeBoer. But I would think those other two guys have a shot. I will say this. If Dylan Lonergan doesn't end up getting to play at Alabama over the next year or two, you're going to hear his name somewhere else, and he's going to be talented, and it'll either be a starting quarterback for a college football team or he's going to be a high draft pick in the MLB because the dude he's sitting mid-90s on the mound, and he's got a nasty breaking pitch as well. So really talented kid. We'll see what he ends up doing.
And you make a great point, Blayne, back to Jalen Milroe. I think for Kalen DeBoer, one of your top priorities early on is continuing to earn the trust and the respect of your locker room, of your football team. I do agree with you to a point that, I think it should be open competition, but Jalen Milroe is that guy to where if you bench him, you do risk, how is the rest of my football team going to respond to this? A guy who's been a leader. He's selfless. We saw last year in the South Florida game, right? He got benched. He came back. I thought that was really courageous, and I thought it was really admirable the way he responded to that adversity. So to your point, I think they stick with him. Defensively too, Blayne. Again, how much can we really learn? What will we see in the spring game? This is going to continue to be a storyline going into kickoff, but you've got Kane Womack on the defensive side, who was really good as a head coach at South Alabama. Defenses were fantastic. all the football folks I talk to, they rave about this guy. They talk about how great he is. He's a great recruiter. His defenses, the schemes, the systems, what have you. Really young secondary. We mentioned the word change. They brought in those 3 5-star signees. Caleb Downs is going to Ohio State. I'm so used to saying, Blayne, with Alabama that, yesterday's bench players are tomorrow's stars, but they're going to be asking a lot of young guys to make a lot of big plays early on. Good news is, though, you've got these early enrollees, but, it's a new-look secondary and a lot of new pieces for Kane Womack to put together.
Listen to these names. Jameer Grimsley, who was a highly touted high school kid that never even got going. He's at Florida now. Caleb Downs, Ohio State. Trey Amos, Ole Miss. Jake Pope, Georgia. Des Ricks, Texas A&M. Antonio Kite, Auburn. Earl Little Jr. goes to FSU. Christian Story, Kentucky. Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Jalen Key, all to the NFL. You lose all of those guys. The only guy you got coming back with any kind of experience, Malachi Moore. Really that edge, Jalil Hurley a little bit, Devontae Smith a little bit. The rest of these guys, no experience, brand new as freshmen. You got Damani Jackson coming in who, listen, Damani Jackson's going to have to, get that Alex Grinch stench off of him over there from USC coming over because don't know what's going on with that. But, man, it is going to be – that is something we are going to be able to see in the spring. Are there busted coverages? You can see that clearly in a spring game. If there's a busted coverage by a young kid not doing what he's supposed to on the back end, and especially when you have to subdivide this secondary and turn it into 2 different teams and stuff like that, we're going to see some MAs. We're going to see some missed assignments. We're going to see some stuff like that. I want to see these guys be able to tackle in the secondary. I want to see them just not bust coverages, and I think that's all you can ask for if you're Alabama right now in the spring with that young secondary. But they ought to be very, very talented up front. Still got a lot of talent up front. Deontay Lawson coming back at the linebacker position. He's going to have to be a just true leader there for Kane Womack and all those guys. So I'm excited to see it. Excited to see how this Alabama defense is going to kind of mature during this spring because there is going to be a lot of youth.
And you mentioned, Blayne, the line of scrimmage. A lot of talent, a lot of question marks. They were not good last year, historically bad. You mentioned losing the O-line coach. That's a huge loss. We cannot overstate how big of a loss this is. Blayne, we're going to do this for every single team. One player that you're most excited to hear about, and we can have the same answers because I went back and forth on this. It's got to be Jalen Milroe, man. I'm fascinated to hear how he's adjusting to, a new scheme, how he's adjusting to things with Kalen DeBoer. Also his leadership, right? I think this is going to be a guy they're going to talk about a lot again, whether it's in press conferences, media availability, whatever, and then, of course, watching in the spring game. Don't know how much he'll play, but is there a guy other than Jalen Milroe that you're excited to hear about, that you're excited to hear this coaching staff dive into detail on how he's doing in spring, or do you go with the Alabama QB1?
No, I think I'm excited to see what Justice Haynes does because Justice Haynes is a guy that I think could have and probably should have gotten a lot of carries last year for Alabama. Okay, I think he's the most talented running back on that roster, really. But he, Saban's was loyal to guys that stuck around and played and did things like that, and now Justice Haynes gets his opportunity, I believe, this year. Him and Jam Miller kind of 1A, 1B for me. If there's going to be a time, I don't care how high flying you are, Chris, or how open your offense is or things of that nature, there's going to be a time in the SEC where you've got to run the football, whether it's 4 minutes at the end of the game, close something out, stuff like that. And Justice Haynes is a guy who in high school was getting the ball 35, 40 times a game. I'm telling you, he's a dude, and he's got that pedigree. He's got the fire. He's got the hunger. I think you'll see big things out of him and Jam Miller for Alabama this year.